Welcome back, everybody, to our Fresh Catholic Teaching Courses Series number 7, the Days of Holy Week. This is episode number 2. And in this episode, we'll take a look at the first day of Holy Week, Palm Sunday. So just as a little refresher, first episode, we kind of laid in the geographic context, introduced ourselves to a couple of the main characters. We learned why there were massive crowds in Jerusalem at this time. And we kind of learned what their expectation of many of them were. So we left episode number 1 with Jesus and his disciples at the home of Lazarus, Martha, and Mary in Bethany, a small village or town just outside of Jerusalem. It's Saturday night. It's the eve of the beginning of Holy Week. That's where we left episode number 1. Now, episode number 2, this episode will examine the first day of Holy Week, Palm Sunday. So, let's set the scene. Now, for each of these days of Holy Week, I'm going to be drawing from all 4 of the Gospels so we can have kind of a full and complete picture of each day. Because as you know, different Gospel writers emphasize and record different events, or they record the same events from different perspectives. So to have the fullest treatment possible in the time limits that we have, I'm going to draw from all 4 Gospels. So how does it start? Okay. First of all, we know that Jesus enters Jerusalem. He makes his triumphal entry on Palm Sunday. And we know he makes it by riding on a donkey. Well, let's answer the first question. Where does this donkey come from? Because again, as we go through Holy Week, there's going to be so many things that, we've heard about, we know about, but we really don't think much about. And we certainly don't know the theological significance of them. And this donkey is going to be the first example of that. Because, the donkey, over the centuries, this donkey, he hasn't gotten much love. All we know about him is Jesus rode him into Jerusalem during his triumphal entry. And then the donkey leaves the pages of salvation history, right? Well, this donkey had huge theological significance. It's no accident that Jesus rode a donkey into Jerusalem. So we're going to camp on this donkey quite a bit on this episode because he holds a lot of theological significance. And therefore, the first thing we got to learn about him is where did he come from? And how did Jesus get to the point of riding on him? So that's where we'll start our examination of our first day of Holy Week, Palm Sunday, by kind of zeroing in and giving this donkey maybe some long overdue love. So let me read you from Mark's Gospel how this donkey got to Jesus. And it's the very beginning of a chapter. This is what Mark records. He says, "And when they drew near to Jerusalem and to Bethany at the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, 'Go into the village opposite you, and immediately upon it, entering it, you will find a donkey tied, upon which no man has sat. Loose it and bring it.'" Let me hit the pause button. So, they're at Bethany, right? Jesus sends 2 of his disciples to the village opposite Bethany. Now, this village, as we remarked in the first episode, is Bethpage. So again, if we're trying to visualize these scenes as we go through Holy Week, visualize Jesus and his disciples in Bethany. Jesus tells 2 of his disciples, go to the town opposite us, Bethpage, okay? And when you enter it, there's going to be a donkey tied up. And this donkey has never been ridden by anybody. loose the donkey and bring it to me. Now, let's dig a little deeper. Jesus sends 2 of his disciples. Now, if you're like me, you're curious. There's 12 disciples, right, at this point, right? Which 2 did he send? I wonder. Well, we can consult another gospel and we find out the 2 that he sent were Peter and John. So Jesus sends Peter and John to go to the village opposite them, Bethpage, right? And bring a donkey back. That's where they got that donkey from. Now, Mark indicates an interesting detail. He says this donkey has never been sat on by anyone. In other words, he's never been ridden. He's never been broken. Now, if you try and ride on an animal that's never been ridden and broken, that animal is going to try and buck you off, right? He's going to try and get you off of him. That donkey doesn't do that to Jesus. That donkey, although unridden and unbroken, remains calm when Jesus sits on it. All right? Now let's pick up the narrative, right? Peter and John have entered Bethpage, and just like Jesus said, there's a donkey there that's tied up. And they start to unloosen it to bring it back, just as Jesus asked them to do. Now, let's pick up the narrative. He says, Mark does, and if anyone says to you, what are you doing untying this donkey? You shall say, the Lord has need of it, and immediately he will send it here. So again, you're Peter and John. You're told, go to Bethpage. Upon entering the village, you'll see a donkey tied up. Loosen it up and bring it to me. And if the owner of that donkey says, hey, what are you doing taking my donkey? Tell the owner the Lord has need of it, he'll bring it back. Well, it plays out exactly as Jesus said it would, doesn't it? They enter Bethpage. Sure enough, there's a donkey tied up. Sure enough, they start to unloosen it. Sure enough, the owner says, hey, what's going on? The disciples tell him what they told, Jesus told them to tell him. The Lord has need of it. He'll bring it back immediately. And the owner lets them take the donkey to Jesus. So that's the background of where the donkey came from, Bethpage, and how he got to Jesus. And by the way, some people say, well, wait a second, here these disciples just take this guy's donkey. Is Jesus condoning stealing, theft? No, because again, look at what Jesus told the disciples. Tell the guy the Lord has need of it, and he'll bring it back immediately. So as soon as Jesus uses it to enter Jerusalem, the donkey is brought back to the owner. So the donkey is borrowed, if you will, not stolen. So that's where the donkey comes from. That's how he got to Jesus. Now, let's stay with this donkey a little bit longer, right? A donkey has huge theological significance because a donkey is an animal that symbolizes peace and service and humility and suffering. Let me say that again. Peace, service, humility, and suffering. That's what the donkey symbolized in the first century. And those are characteristics and aspects of Jesus. Okay? Also, a donkey is something that again, is being a symbol of peace. If anyone rode on a donkey, that signified they were coming in peace. If you were a king and you were going out to battle, you would ride a war horse. You would ride a stallion. If you were coming in peace, you would ride a donkey. So the war horse, the stallion, symbolized war. The donkey symbolized peace. And when the crowd saw Jesus coming into Jerusalem on a donkey, that should have been their first inkling that maybe, just maybe, this guy is not going to be the kind of Messiah and Savior and deliverer and king we thought he was going to be, we expected him to be. Because if he's going to be this earthly, political, military king that's going to lead a revolution and that's going to overthrow Rome, if that was the kind of Messiah he was going to be, then he would have ridden in on a stallion on a war horse. The fact that Jesus chooses a donkey is the first signal to this crowd of what kind of Messiah, Savior, deliverer, king he's going to be, and it's not going to be the one that many of them expect. Well, over the course of Holy Week, this begins to dawn on people, and that's one of the reasons why the cheers of Palm Sunday turn to shouts of crucify him on Good Friday, because during the course of the week, it dawns on many of these people that, hey, this guy is not going to be the political, military deliverer we thought he was going to be. Well, Jesus signaled that right from the get-go when A, he chose to ride an animal into Jerusalem rather than walk, and B, he chose the animal of peace, a donkey. All right? So that donkey has huge theological significance. So now we know where he came from, how he got to Jesus, and why Jesus chose to ride a donkey in the first place. So let's pick up the narrative. The donkey is brought to Jesus. Jesus mounts the donkey, and now they head into Jerusalem. They're going down Main Street into Jerusalem. Crowds, massive crowds that are gathered there for the Passover, to celebrate the Passover. They're lining the streets. And they're doing certain things, and they're saying certain things. And every single thing they're doing and every single thing they're saying, like the donkey, has huge theological significance. Now, what are the things they're doing? They're doing two main things. They're laying their garments on the road in front of Jesus, and they're waving palm branches, hence Palm Sunday. Those are the two main things they're doing. What they're saying is they're shouting, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, the laying of the garments, the waving of the palm branches, the shouting of Hosanna, each of those had huge theological significance. So the next thing we got to do is examine the theological significance, but behind those things. So let's take a look at the actions first, and then what they're saying. They lay their garments on the road in front of Jesus. So again, if you're trying to visualize this, it's Main Street, right? It's going down Main Street into Jerusalem. Crowds on either side. Jesus is riding in with a donkey. The crowds are laying their garments on the road, so the donkey with Jesus on it is on the garments, not on the actual road. You might say, in a way, this is the first century equivalent of a red carpet entrance, right? So in laying down their garments, it's sort of like they're rolling out the red carpet for this, again, expected military, political Messiah, Savior, deliverer that's going to overthrow Rome and lead the revolution. They're ushering them into Jerusalem via a red carpet. So in one aspect, the garments can kind of be seen as ushering him in on a red garment. But more theologically, whenever you took off your garment and laid it before a king, which Jesus is, right? That shows your submission to the king and his kingly rule. So when they lay down their garments as Jesus is entering Jerusalem, yes, in one vein, they're rolling out the red carpet for him, but in a deeper sense, they're showing their submission to him as king, their submission to his kingly rule, and their submission to his kingdom, which again, many of them think will be an earthly, political, military one. So that's the deal with the garments. Now, the other thing they were doing is they're waving palm branches. Now, interestingly enough, the other Gospels indicate they're waving leafy branches. Now, how do we get to the point that these leafy branches are actually palm branches? Well, John is the one that mentions they're actually palm branches, which is where we get the name of this day, Palm Sunday. So those leafy branches that they're waving were actually palm branches, and we know that from John's Gospel. Now, again, the palm branches. In one vein, you can say, and if you've seen some of these movies, you know sometimes when a king comes in or when the king is sitting on his throne, his attendants are fanning him with big branches. So that was something you did in the presence of a king. So in one vein, like rolling out the red carpet, they're actually fanning this king with these palm branches. But again, a deeper theological significance is palm branches were kind of a nationalistic symbol that indicated victory. So a lot of times when a king who had been out to battle comes back into the city, one of the things that the residents of the city did to welcome this victorious king back from battle is they would wave palm branches. So when this king enters Jerusalem, in their minds, to overthrow Rome, all right, and to give them victory over Rome and finally get them out from underneath Roman oppression, how do they greet this king coming into the city? By waving palm branches. So both the garments and the palm branches in one vein had kind of a first century red garment, a red carpet, and fanning a king with branches aspect. But in another, they had some very deep theological significance. So when you read this account and you read the fact that they're putting their garments on the ground in front of them and they're waving palm branches, now you know the theology behind that. But that's not all they're doing. They're also shouting, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, Hosanna means God saves. And that's exactly what they're expecting. They're expecting, okay, now God is going to save his people, they're thinking, from Rome and Caesar. When really, as we know, he's going to save his people from Satan and sin. So that's why they shout Hosanna, because Hosanna means God saves, and they think now the prophecies are going to be fulfilled. And they are, but just not in the way that they hoped for and expected. Okay? Now, let's kind of sum up this scene. Because if you're a first century Jewish person, and you know your scriptures, your Old Testament, all right? And now you see this long-awaited, hoped-for Messiah, Savior, Deliverer, King, finally entering the city of Jerusalem at Passover time, all right? Your thoughts are going to go back to one verse in the scriptures, Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. This is going to be echoing in your mind as you see this individual come into Jerusalem on a donkey. Let me read you Zechariah 9:9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, Jerusalem. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, and here's the key, behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey. All right? You've been waiting for that verse to be fulfilled. And now you're seeing this guy come into Jerusalem, mounted on a donkey, bringing salvation. But again, salvation from Rome and Caesar is what you're thinking and hoping for and expecting. And that's why you're laying your garments down. That's why you're waving those palm branches. That's why you're shouting, Hosanna, God saves. Because you figure, okay, finally, we're going to be out from under the oppression and bondage of Rome and Caesar. And Israel is going to rise again to the heights it had under King David and King Solomon. This is finally what you've been waiting for. And now, right in front of your eyes, it's happening as you're seeing him come down Main Street, Jerusalem, into the capital city. So that's the triumphal entry, and that's some of the background around it, including that donkey, who now we finally give some long-awaited love to, okay? So he arrives in Jerusalem. Now, what's the first thing he does? Now, remember, Jesus is going to give these people clues and signs all through Holy Week that he's not the kind of Messiah and Savior and deliverer and King many of them expect. The first sign, as we've already indicated, is the donkey, okay? The second sign is what he does when he arrives in Jerusalem. Now, if he was the political, military deliverer, Savior, Messiah, King many expected, if he was that kind of king, then if you're part of the crowd, you would have expected him, as he hits the city of Jerusalem, right, to go straight to the palace, because that's where kings reside. They reside in a palace, right? That's where their throne is. Jesus doesn't go there. He doesn't make a beeline to the palace. Where does he go? He goes to his Father's house, the temple. So the fact that he went to the temple and not to the palace, that's the second sign he gives to the crowd, basically saying, hey, I know what you're thinking, I know what you're hoping for, I know what you're expecting, but that's not the kind of Messiah, Savior, King I'm going to be. So right off the bat, day one of Holy Week, Palm Sunday, right, he gives the crowd two clear signs to kind of reorient their expectations of who he is and what he's going to do. But sadly, as we know, those signs went over the heads of many of the crowd. So he makes a beeline to the temple. He enters the temple, surveys the scene. And we know what he sees, don't we? He sees merchants selling animals. He sees money changers sitting at tables exchanging money. Now, we know the story, right? We know he's going to drive out the merchants and their animals. We know he's going to overturn the tables of the money changers. He's going to make that whip of cords. And he's going to accuse them of making his Father's house into a marketplace, right? We know the story. He's not going to do that today, Palm Sunday. He's going to do that tomorrow, on Monday of Holy Week. All he does today on Palm Sunday, once he hits Jerusalem, is he goes to the temple and he just surveys the scene. He checks it out. He inspects it. And that's what he sees. The merchants and the animals, the money changers and the temples. He doesn't take any action yet. He just surveys the scene. And then after surveying the scene, he and his disciples leave Jerusalem and spend Sunday night back in Bethany in the home of Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. That's day one. That's Palm Sunday. So as we close down this episode, let's kind of take stock of what we've learned. Number one, we know that where Jesus and his disciples are staying during the evenings of Holy Week, at least the first half of Holy Week, is they're staying in a village, a town, Bethany, which is the home of Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. We know where the donkey comes from, the adjoining town, village, Bethpage. We know how the donkey got to Jesus. We know the theological significance of the donkey. And we know that the donkey is the first signal Jesus gives to the crowd that, I'm not the kind of Messiah, Savior, Deliverer, King that maybe you expect. So we've covered that. Then, as he makes his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, we know the story behind them laying down garments. We know the theological significance of that. We know the theological significance of them waving palm branches. And we know where we get the idea of their palm branches from, the Gospel of John. We know the theological significance of what they're shouting, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And we also know what he does when he arrives in Jerusalem. He does not go to the palace, he goes to the temple. Signal number two, that he's not the kind of Messiah, Deliverer, Savior, and King many expect. But when he gets to the temple, he doesn't cleanse it, as we say, just yet. He just inspects it, he surveys the scene, he checks it out, files it away, and then he and his disciples head back out of Jerusalem to Bethany to spend the night at the home of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. So that's day one of Holy Week, what we call the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, Palm Sunday. The two big events, the actual entry itself and the surveying of the scene of the temple. So with that, I indicated we're going to try and kind of bring these episodes in somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes, so they're kind of digestible chunks. That's why we spread them out over 9. I'm looking at my monitor, and it's hitting 28 minutes, so we're off to a good start. So with that, hopefully, you've learned a lot more about Palm Sunday, the triumphal entry. So when Palm Sunday rolls around this Holy Week, you'll be able to enter into it, as we said last episode, more deeply and profoundly, maybe than you ever have. That's kind of our hope. So with that said, as always, thank you for supporting Fresh Catholics. Thank you for supporting this series. Have a blessed and holy Holy Week. And until next time, episode 3, where we'll look at Holy Week Monday, when he actually cleanses the temple, which many of us know he does, but he also, kind of a spoiler alert, her little teaser, he also does something else. Not only does he cleanse the temple, but he also, on the way back into Jerusalem to cleanse that temple, he curses a fig tree. So that's why, Monday he cleanses and he curses is kind of what we say. And two events that again have huge theological significance, and even though they're separate events, they're connected to each other. So hopefully I've whetted your appetite enough so you'll tune in to episode 3, Monday of Holy Week. Take care and God bless everybody.